They say the Appalachian mountains never forget what they've buried. In the mist-choked hollows and shadowed ridgelines, stories pass from one generation to the next, not as campfire tales, but as warnings, whispers of the vanished, the cursed, and the things that were never quite human. Here, in one of America's oldest and most haunted regions, real horror isn't confined to fiction. It breathes in the forests, lingers in the ruins, and waits for those who dare to stray too far from the trail. Tonight on Verified Fears, we're descending deep into the forgotten places of the Appalachian spine to bring you 14 shocking real-life horror tales from the Appalachians. These are stories drawn from first-hand testimonies, missing person reports, and the folklore etched into the mountains themselves. Some you may have heard in hushed tones. Others, no one dares to speak aloud. All of them are rooted in truth, or something close enough to it. If you're drawn to the kind of horror that leaves questions unanswered, where the line between myth and memory blurs, then this is your kind of darkness. Subscribe to Verified Fears and turn on notifications, because the next story could be hiding in your own backyard. And now, let's begin. But remember, in these hills, not everything that's lost wants to be found. They always said black. Hollow was colder than the rest of the mountain, even in summer, even when the creeks ran low and the wildflowers bloomed along the ridgelines. But in the dead of winter, that hollow turned cruel. The frost came early, settled deep, and lingered, long after the snow had melted everywhere else. Locals said it was cursed, that something ancient lived in those woods, something that didn't like to be disturbed. The Carr family didn't believe in curses, not when they moved into the old homestead in the winter of 1932. It had stood empty for over a decade, nestled between two steep slopes of pine and bare rock. The father, Jeremiah Carr, was a logger by trade, a hard man who believed in work and whiskey, not folklore. His wife, Mary, was quiet but kind, and their 3 children, Caleb 10, Ruthie 8, and baby Samuel, followed their parents like shadows. They'd fallen on hard times and gotten the place for next to nothing. That alone should have been a warning. The first sign that something was wrong came just days after they arrived. Ruthie began waking up in the middle of the night, teeth chattering, crying that there were cold people standing at the window. Jeremiah chalked it up to nightmares and the adjustment to the freezing temperatures. But soon Caleb said he saw them too, pale figures standing just inside the tree line at dusk, unmoving. Too thin to be men, too still to be animals. He said they didn't breathe, just watched, always watching. Then came the knocking. It started on the 6th night. Slow, deliberate knocks at the walls of the cabin, not the front door, but the walls themselves. Always 3 knocks, sometimes low to the ground, sometimes up near the rafters. Jeremiah searched the woods by lantern light more than once, yelling into the darkness, shotgun in hand. He never found tracks, but once he did find Ruthie's rag doll sitting in the middle of the yard, frozen solid, its eyes gouged out. Mary wanted to leave. She begged him. Said she heard whispers at night, not voices, just breath, as if someone was standing over her while she slept. But Jeremiah refused. He wouldn't let fear chase him off land he'd finally managed to call his own. On the 14th night, the snow fell hard. By morning, the cabin was sealed in, drifts nearly to the roof. When the mailman arrived 3 days later, the Carr home was silent. The chimney, cold. No smoke, no footprints, no movement. Just silence. And that terrible, unnatural cold. When the sheriff and his men arrived, they found the cabin empty. No bodies, no signs of struggle. Baby Samuel's cradle sat untouched, blanket folded neatly inside. The table was set for breakfast, plates covered in a thin layer of frost. A fire had clearly been burning just hours before. The coals still held a trace of warmth. But the family was gone, all of them. Outside the cabin, the snow was undisturbed, except for a trail of small barefoot prints, children's footprints, leading from the front door into the woods. They went for about 30 yards and then just stopped. No returning tracks, no drag marks, just an ending, as if the children had been plucked from the ground mid-step. Oddest of all, the footprints were burned into the snow. Not just indented, but scorched, like heat had radiated from the soles. The sheriff sealed off the area and told the press it was a disappearance under investigation. But in private, he told his brother he would never go back to that hollow. He said the air felt wrong there. Too still. Too cold. Years passed. The land was left to rot. The trees grew up around the cabin again. Hunters who strayed too close reported hearing a baby crying in the woods, always just out of reach. Some said they saw children, pale, barefoot, wearing old-fashioned clothes, darting between trees. One hiker swore he came across a small boy standing beside the ruins of the cabin. The boy looked up at him, smiled, and said, "You're warm." Then he vanished. In 1987, a group of amateur paranormal investigators spent the night in the hollow. Only one came back. She was found wandering the woods barefoot, lips blue, skin frostbitten, even though it was nearly 60 degrees that day. When asked what happened, she whispered, "They're so cold. They were never alive. Not really." The Carr family was never found. No bodies, no evidence, just a growing legend about Black Hollow, where the cold never leaves, and neither do the ones it takes. So if you ever find yourself on a trail in those mountains, and the air suddenly drops, not a breeze, not a chill, but a dead, deep cold that creeps into your bones, don't stop. Don't look into the trees. And, whatever you do, don't follow the sound of children laughing. They're not lost. They're waiting. They called him Brother Elijah. Nobody knew where he came from. Just that one summer evening in 1901, he walked into the dying coal town of Withers Gap, Tennessee, carrying a Bible bound in leather black as coal and a suitcase nobody ever saw him open. The town had been in a long decline. The mine shut down after a cave-in the year before. Men out of work, families scraping by, the kind of place where hope had grown thin and hard like the soil itself. He arrived barefoot, dust clinging to his feet like ash, and within a week, people were calling him a gift from God. Brother Elijah spoke like fire. His voice could crack the silence like thunder. He didn't build a church. He didn't need to. He preached from the old town square, day and night, rain or shine. Said the devil had crept into the mountains, hiding in the hearts of men. Claimed he'd come to burn it out. Folks were drawn to him, hypnotized by that voice, that stare. He knew things about people, things they never said aloud. One woman swore he knew the name of her stillborn child, though she'd buried the memory deep. Another said he called out her husband's sins before the man even confessed them. Some claimed he never blinked. Then came the deaths. At first, it was a child, a 6-year-old girl found drowned in a well. Her mother swore she'd seen her daughter walking barefoot toward the woods the night before. Eyes wide, mouth moving like she was reciting something. The townsfolk grieved, held a service. Brother Elijah gave the eulogy, said the Lord had taken her to cleanse the town of hidden rot. Then a boy 12 went missing, found hanging in the bell tower of the schoolhouse, Bible pages stuffed in his mouth. The sheriff called it suicide, but people whispered otherwise. They said Brother Elijah had preached about Judas that morning, had looked straight at the boy, while quoting the verse about betrayal. The third was a baby, found frozen in her crib during the hottest week of the year. Panic took root. Parents kept their children close, but the fear was tangled with fascination. Elijah had become a force, magnetic. The more people died, the more they listened. He held nightly sermons now, by lantern light. Said the children weren't lost, they'd been called. That God was cleansing the innocent first, before turning his wrath on the wicked. And if they didn't want to be next, they needed to confess. And they did. The town turned into a fever dream of repentance. People knelt in the mud, weeping, clawing at the air for forgiveness. A man burned down his own home, claimed his sins had seeped into the walls. Another walked into the hills and never came back, leaving behind a letter that read only, "He sees me now." Still, Brother Elijah smiled, preached, collected secrets like coins, but not everyone bowed. Old May Lillian, who ran the general store, refused to attend his gatherings, called him a false prophet. One night, her store caught fire, and from the ashes they found only her charred bones, arms wrapped around something they couldn't identify. Some said it looked like a second skeleton, too small to be hers, too twisted to be human. The sheriff finally stepped in. He stormed Elijah's lodgings, an abandoned chapel at the edge of town, but the preacher was gone. The cot he slept on was neatly made, his Bible resting atop it, open to the book of Revelation. His suitcase was missing. On the walls were scrawled dozens of names, every person in town, some crossed out, others still untouched. At the bottom, in red ink or blood, was written, "Judgment begins at home." That night, a storm rolled in hard. Lightning cracked the sky like bones. The townsfolk stayed indoors, windows boarded, doors bolted. But they heard it, the preaching. Not thunder, but a voice echoing across the mountains, distorted, inhuman. It spoke in verses, half scripture, half gibberish. And beneath it, the sound of children crying, or laughing, no one could be sure. The next morning they found the forest carved with crosses, hundreds of them, each one different, some simple, others made from bones. The names that had been crossed out in the chapel had vanished from the town. Every one. No trace, just their empty beds and open doors. To this day no one knows who Brother Elijah really was. No records, no birth, no death. Some say he was a drifter. Others say he wasn't a man at all, but something older, something that used God's name like a knife, something that fed on guilt and fear and the blind loyalty of desperate people. Withers Gap faded into a ghost town over the decades, swallowed by ivy and time. The only thing left standing is that chapel at the edge of the woods. Travelers who camp nearby say they hear sermons echoing through the trees at night, long-dead voices calling out verses in the dark, and sometimes the sound of small, bare feet walking just outside their tent. So ask yourself, if a stranger showed up in your town and knew the sins you thought were buried, would you confess, or would you wait to be chosen? Some games you don't play. Some games play you. They say the devil doesn't knock. He just waits. And in the hills outside of Bartow, West Virginia, folks used to say he waited under the old Dry Creek Bridge, a crooked, rusting iron span that hadn't been safe to drive on since the 1950s. Most people avoided it. Those who didn't usually wished they had. The story was well known in Pocahontas County circles, whispered around fire pits and back porches. It always started the same. Someone takes the shortcut through Dry Creek after dark, alone, tired, maybe just trying to shave 10 minutes off a long drive. They reach the bridge. Then something happens. The engine dies. The radio fills with static. And then they hear it. Slow, deliberate footsteps on metal, walking toward the car. In 1979, it was Sheriff Arthur Pike who finally documented the pattern. He was a war vet, hard-nosed, not one for ghost stories. But the disappearances were stacking up. Between 1958 and 1978, 6 separate individuals had vanished near Dry Creek, all alone, all at night, all heading across that bridge. No wrecks, no bodies, just abandoned vehicles and radios that played nothing but low, crackling whispers. When they were found, Sheriff Pike didn't believe in demons, but he did believe in patterns, and he noticed something else. Each of the missing had been carrying something heavy. Guilt, a drunk driver who'd killed a child and never confessed, a preacher run out of another town for abusing his congregation, a nurse rumored to have Let an old man die just to settle a grudge, the kind of sins people thought stayed buried. But something under that bridge, he figured, was digging them back up. Still, he didn't share those thoughts out loud, not until the night his own daughter, Lorraine, went missing. Lorraine Pike was 26, a schoolteacher, sweet as spring water. But behind her smile, she carried a secret, one she never spoke aloud, not even to her father. 2 months before her disappearance, her fiancé had drowned in Cheat Lake. The official story was accidental, rough current, drinking involved, but Lorraine had been the last person to see him alive, and her sister swore she heard Lorraine say in a moment of anger, "Sometimes I wish he'd just disappear." On October 3, 1979, Lorraine left a friend's house around 10:45 p.m., driving the back road home, through Dry Creek. She never arrived. Her car was found the next morning, right on the bridge. Headlights still on. Engine cold. Driver's door wide open. The radio emitted nothing but static, and one of her shoes sat neatly placed on the hood. Like it had been offered. Sheriff Pike lost something inside himself that day, quit the force a year later, grew a beard, moved into the woods near the bridge. He started building something there, not a home, not quite a shrine, more like a wall of memory. He nailed photos of the missing to trees, carved their names into wood planks, and lined the creek with crosses made from driftwood and twine. Locals called him the Mourner. He stayed there for 15 years. Never spoke much. But once, a passing hiker claimed he heard Pike say something under his breath while staring at the bridge. "It don't take the innocent, just the ones who think they can hide." The bridge was finally condemned in 1995 after a teenage couple claimed to see a man made of shadows crawling across the steel beams toward them. Their story matched earlier ones from the 60s, the same description: long limbs, backward bent, joints, glowing red eyes like coals, and always the sound of chains dragging on metal. After that, the state closed it off. Welded metal plates over both entrances. But the locals knew better. They said the bridge wasn't the problem. It was the space beneath. The hollow where the water ran dark and slow and cold, even in summer. In 2014, a podcaster from Charleston named Daniel Reams tried to investigate the legend. He spent 3 nights camping near Dry Creek, recording everything. His final audio file was uploaded automatically to the cloud. It's still out there if you know where to look. On the tape, you hear the crickets go quiet around 2:13 a.m. Then the hum of water. Then a voice. Low, rusted, gravel thick, whispering, "Confess, or be claimed." Then silence. Daniel was never found. Only his recorder, balanced on the bridge rail, still warm to the touch. Today, Dry Creek is almost forgotten. The bridge is overgrown, the road barely visible. But once in a while a car will stop at the edge of the old path. Sometimes they're thrill seekers, sometimes they're people running from something, and sometimes they leave their car, walk out onto the bridge, and never come back. Locals say it still waits there, whatever wit is, the thing that smells guilt the way a hound smells blood, not a ghost, not a man, just the devil's toll-keeper, collecting those who thought their sins were too small to matter. So if you're ever out near Bartow after dark, and your GPS tells you to take the shortcut down Dry Creek Road, don't. No matter how late you are, no matter how tired, because the devil doesn't need to chase you, he just waits, and the bridge never forgets who crossed it. They say the mountain doesn't just remember, it punishes. In McDowell County, West Virginia, deep in a narrow, forgotten hollow called Dead Man's Fork, there's a twisted black tree growing out of solid rock. Nothing grows near it. No moss, no birds, no sound. Locals call it the witch tree. And most folks know better than to go near it, especially after sundown. But back in the spring of 1951, a mining family named the Blevins ignored those warnings. Tom Blevins was a Second-generation coal man, mean from the inside out. After a drunken brawl got him run off from Gary, he moved his wife, Esther, and their 2 sons, Reuben, 14, and Willard, 10, into an abandoned shack just past Dead Man's Fork. It wasn't a house fit for dogs, but it was cheap, and the company wasn't asking questions. The only warning came from an old miner named Ellis Grubb, who told them, plain as day, "That land's not right. Something was buried there that don't want to stay buried." Tom laughed. He didn't believe in curses, witches, or ghosts, just in hard work and hard fists. But Esther knew better. She was born in the mountains, raised by her grandmother, who'd whispered the old stories. She didn't like the way the woods went quiet after dark, or how the wind never touched that single dead tree. The first sign came 3 nights in. Willard started sleepwalking. Esther found him barefoot outside the cabin, staring up at the tree, whispering in a voice that wasn't his. When she brought him back in, he screamed like a butchered hog the moment they crossed the threshold. Tom whipped him for acting, a fool, but Willard didn't remember a thing. The second sign was the animals. The neighbors' dogs refused to come near the Blevins' place. Birds stopped flying over the ridge, and one morning Esther found 3 black snakes curled in a perfect circle on the porch, their heads cut clean off. No predator did that. Then came the dreams. Reuben started screaming in his sleep, crying about a woman with no eyes and a mouth, sewn shut with rusty wire. He said she stood over his bed and bled dirt from her hands. Tom didn't want to hear it, said he'd burn the tree down himself if it meant quiet. He never got the chance. On the night of April 12th, Tom disappeared, no signs of a struggle. His boots were found at the foot of the witch tree, laces undone, toes pointed toward the trunk, like he'd walked there willingly and vanished into the bark. Esther searched the woods for 2 days, screaming his name. On the 3rd night, Reuben came back from the woods shaking, his shirt soaked in sweat. He told his mother he saw his father kneeling at the base of the tree, naked and covered in what looked like sap. "He's not right, Ma," he said, crying. "He don't blink." Esther went to the sheriff, but they didn't send anyone. Said it was out of their jurisdiction, and besides, the Blevins were known trouble. So she went back alone, taking both boys and a kerosene lamp. She found Tom. He was standing behind the tree, still as a grave marker, eyes wide, skin cracked like bark. He didn't speak, didn't move, just smiled, and that smile was all wrong. Pulled, too tight, teeth like slivers. She begged him to come home. He opened his mouth and something thick and black slithered out. Roots, they said later, wormed down his chest and into the dirt. The moment the lamp shattered, Reuben swore the tree screamed. Esther ran with the boys. They never went back. That night, the shack caught fire. Locals saw the smoke, but nobody hiked out to help. By dawn, the house was ash, but the witch tree still stood, untouched, not even singed. Over the years, others tried to camp near the fork. Some were drawn by the legend, others just lost. A few came back different, quieter, distracted, twitchy. Others never came back at all. In 1973, a college student from Charleston hiked out with a tape recorder and a journal. His last entry read, "She's buried under the tree. Her name is stitched into the roots. She's awake now." His body was never recovered. Folklorists trace the tale back to the early 1800s, when the town of Selma Ridge, Quacknell, stood where Dead Man's Fork is now. They say a healer named A. Magda Vero lived there, part herbalist, part midwife, and accused of witchcraft after the death of a preacher's child. A mob hanged her from the tree that grew from a crack in the cliffside. They say it took her 3 days to die because she cursed the land with her last breath. Said no soul would rest near that place, that she'd come back in roots, in soil, in blood. They tried to cut the tree down once, back in 1911. The axe split on first swing. The man who swung it lost his mind a week later and bit out his own tongue. Today, the witch tree still stands, gray-black, gnarled like arthritic fingers. Some say it bleeds when the moon is full. Others claim you can hear a woman singing in a language no one speaks anymore if you stand too close after dark. But only fools get that close. The Blevins boys left West Virginia and never returned. Reuben became a preacher. Willard changed his name, but Reuben gave one final sermon before he died in 1998. He said, "There's a place in the hills where no prayer can reach, a place where something grows that never should have been born, and it's still hungry." So if you're ever hiking through McDowell County and you feel the woods go quiet all at once, no wind, no birds, no breath, turn back. If you see a black tree standing alone on stone, don't look at it. Because the mountain doesn't forget, and neither does she. You wouldn't know Pigeon Hollow existed unless someone told you about it. And even then, most folks who grew up in Clay County, West Virginia, would just shake their heads and mutter something about the quiet ones. The name was whispered, never explained, not a place you'd find on a map, though it had been there long before the war, tucked between two ridgelines southeast of Ivydale. Some called it a lost community. Others called it cursed. The locals didn't call it anything. They just avoided the woods around it, especially after sundown. But in the fall of 1972, a young social worker named Eleanor Ellie Maddox drove into Clay County on assignment from Charleston. She'd graduated with honors, full of ideas about bringing change to forgotten corners of Appalachia. Her job was to track down a string of missing children linked to outlying communities that hadn't been registered with the state since the 1940s. One name kept cropping up on old intake forms, scrawled in the margins or half-erased in pencil. Pigeon Hollow. It wasn't in the census. There were no roads leading to it, just a rough hunting trail that peeled off Route 4 and twisted into the hills. An old logger named Hickson finally admitted it used to be a small settlement, back before they learned to keep to themselves. He didn't say who they were, he only that Pigeon Hollow ain't lost, it's hiding. Ellie packed light. She was 27, newly divorced, and tired of being told she was too soft for field work. She brought a state vehicle, a camera, a legal pad, and one pistol she barely knew how to use, tucked into her glove box, mostly for show. On the third morning of October, she parked where the road gave out and hiked in alone. The trail disappeared after the first mile. The trees thickened into towering black oaks, branches clawing into each other above like fingers in a prayer. The underbrush was strangely flattened, like something large had moved through there often. No birdsong, no wind, just the dry shuffle of her boots over rotting leaves and the occasional crack of something unseen behind her. It was nearly dusk when Ellie found the hollow. 12 houses, no more, no less, each a weather-worn two-story cabin built in a wide ring around a dried-up spring. There were no power lines, no mailboxes, no signs of modern life, just porches sagging with mildew and smoke curling up from two chimneys. And not a single voice. The entire place felt like it had been scooped out of time and left to ferment. She approached the nearest house, notebook in hand. The door opened before she knocked. A woman stood there. Thin, barefoot, gray hair, and a loose braid that nearly reached her knees. She didn't smile, just looked at Ellie with eyes too pale for comfort, like fog trapped in glass. "You shouldn't be here," the woman said flatly. "I'm with the state," Ellie replied, showing her badge. "I'm here to check on the children of this community. We had reports." "There are no children here." That wasn't true. As Ellie stood on the porch, she heard movement inside. Small feet on wooden floors. A shuffle behind a curtain. She wrote it down. Over the next 2 days, she knocked on every door in Pigeon Hollow. The answers were always the same. Polite refusals, tight-lipped adults, and the same empty phrase. "There are no children here." But there were. She saw them, briefly. Pale faces in upstairs windows. Small figures darting between trees. At one point, while crossing the empty center of the village, Ellie spotted a boy crouched near the well, staring at her with hollow, sunken eyes. When she approached, he didn't run. Just stood, backed away, and whispered something she couldn't make out. That night she camped in the woods just outside the clearing. She didn't sleep. On the third night, things changed. Ellie awoke to the sound of chanting, soft, rhythmic, in a language she didn't recognize. She crawled toward the ridge and peered down at the hollow. Every adult stood around the well in a wide circle, holding hands. They were barefoot, heads bowed, and in the center, surrounded by candles, knelt the children, eyes closed, lips moving in unison. The scene was peaceful, but wrong. Something in the cadence, the way they swayed, the hum that vibrated through the air. It felt older than language, older than memory. The next morning she found her vehicle surrounded by birds, not living birds, dead ones, pigeons, dozens of them, arranged in a perfect ring around her tires, everyone missing its eyes. Still, Ellie refused to leave. She had grown up poor in Boone County. She knew what it was to be overlooked. She wasn't going to walk away just because a group of people wanted her to. That day, she returned to the house where she'd first been turned away. The old woman was waiting for her. This time she invited Ellie inside. The walls were covered in hand-carved symbols, strange spirals and branch-like lines etched deep into the wood, as if to keep something in, not out. "You want to know about the children," the woman said, voice as flat as ever. "Then listen close and don't write a word." Ellie nodded. "We were founded by silence," the woman said. "That's what the old ones called it. Silence that walks. It started during the famine of 1816, when the snow came and never left. Our people lived off pigeons that winter, killed so many the skies turned empty. The elders say we ate the wrong ones. There was something in them, something that saw." She paused. "We thought it passed, but the spring never came. The birds stayed gone. And then the children started changing." "Changing how?" Ellie asked. "They stopped speaking, not from fear, from instruction. Something whispered to them in the root cellars, in their dreams. They listened. We didn't. Over the next 100 years, Pigeon Hollow shrank. Families vanished. Bloodlines thinned. Those who left never spoke of it again. Those who stayed learned one rule: never raise your voice after dark. Because the silence hears it, and once it hears you, it follows. The children you've seen," the woman said, "aren't children anymore. They haven't aged in decades. The silence keeps them, feeds off what they know. And if you stay, it'll feed off you too." That night, Ellie tried to leave. Her vehicle wouldn't start. She hiked until her flashlight died, but the trail never came back. Trees moved. Paths curved inward. The woods refused to release her. She slept leaning against a stone, and woke with dried blood under her nose and scratches down her arms she didn't remember getting. She stopped recording notes. Her handwriting began to change. Slanted, cramped, she stopped saying her own name aloud. On the 10th night, she wrote one final sentence in her journal. "The children have no mouths anymore, just skin where lips should be." She was never seen again. The official report listed her as presumed dead. The file was closed without ceremony, but in 2007, a hiker from Ohio found her notebook wedged between stones near a dry well. It was intact, pages brittle but legible. The last page showed the same spiral carved into every wall of Pigeon Hollow. Beneath it, in ink darker than the rest, was a single line. "Silence is not the absence of sound. It's what waits behind it." No one has reached the hollow since, but sometimes after long rains in Clay County, hikers say you can hear something coming from the trees, a hum, like a child singing. And if you answer, if you speak its name or ask, "Who's there?" the woods will hush themselves, the way a room goes still before a scream. Because silence isn't empty. It's listening, and the quiet ones of Pigeon Hollow are still waiting. They still call it the Devil's Footprint up in Lick Fork, Kentucky, even though nobody much lives out there anymore. It's not a real town, just a scattering of derelict homesteads along the base of Pine Mountain, where the creek twists through coal-black hollers and hollows. In the 1930s, Lick Fork was one of dozens of poor, God-fearing mining communities barely scratching out a living after the Depression. No electricity, no cars, just a church, a schoolhouse, and the bone-deep belief that heaven and hell were watching every move you made, especially in Lick Fork. That's where Reverend Elam Colburn comes in, a tall, gaunt man from Alabama with eyes like frostbite and a voice that could bring grown men to their knees. He arrived in Lick Fork in 1936 with nothing but a Bible, a burlap satchel, and a promise to save their rotting Appalachian souls. The people welcomed him like he was the second coming. They needed hope. What they got was something else entirely. The first year he preached, people changed. Men stopped drinking, families gathered nightly to pray, and no one dared skip a Sunday sermon. Reverend Colburn preached fire and brimstone in the old pine beam church, calling down damnation on everyone from the mailman to the governor. He said the Lord had shown him Lick Fork was an unclean place, where sin ran in the blood and shame was inherited like a birthmark. People listened. They repented. But the more they repented, the more he demanded. Then came the burnings. It started small. A young woman named Mary Beth Hensley was caught sneaking off with a boy from the next hollow. Colburn declared her tainted, filled with the devil's whisperings. She was tied to a post in front of the congregation, her clothes soaked in creek water, and Colburn waved a flaming coal shovel inches from her face while speaking in tongues. She screamed. Her parents wept, and afterward she walked around town like someone had scooped her insides out with a spoon, silent, staring, meek. She never married, died young, full of tumors. Then came the second burning, and the third, and on it went, until it was no longer just women or sinners. It was children who talked back, old men who forgot to kneel. Even a baby once, blamed for being born with a withered arm. No one dared defy Colburn. His sermons were thunder. His eyes never blinked, and he claimed to see the devil in the flesh among them, wearing the faces of friends and kin. Still, the townsfolk stayed, because to leave was to reject salvation, and rejection meant hell. One man, Thaddeus Millerkew, tried. He was a miner, 38 years old, with 2 daughters and a wife who had been burned for dancing barefoot in the moonlight. After she died, he packed up and tried to flee one night. They say he made it 10 miles before he was found in a ditch, babbling nonsense and missing all the skin from his feet, as if he'd walked through fire. He died that same night, his last words a garbled prayer to someone he wouldn't name. In 1942, something shifted. The river swelled after weeks of rain and unearthed a section of the mountain behind the church. Mudslides tore through 2 homes, and when the water receded, the children found it. A footprint, not carved, not pressed. Burned into the stone. 15 inches long, 3 inches deep, and surrounded by scorched earth that hadn't grown a blade of grass since. It looked like a man's foot, but wrong. Too long in the heel, toes shaped like claws. It stank of sulfur even when the wind blew. Reverend Colburn claimed it was a sign from the Lord, proof that the devil had tried to set foot in Lick Fork, and that his prayers had stopped him. The congregation believed him, but others, especially the elders, began to whisper. What if Colburn wasn't keeping the devil out? What if he'd let him in? That same year, the burning stopped, not because Colburn stopped preaching, but because people stopped speaking. Entire families would sit stone still during service, faces blank, hands folded. Some say they were drugged. Others believed something in the mountain had taken their tongues. Colburn just smiled, more certain than ever of his divine favor. Then in 1943, the church caught fire. No storm, no lightning, No lantern overturned, just a roar in the middle of a Sunday sermon and flames so hot the bell melted where it hung. 17 people died, including 6 children. Their bodies were found in the exact shape of the congregation's seating arrangement, burned upright in the pews. The sheriff from Harlan County investigated and said the fire had no earthly cause. Colburn was never found. His satchel remained, resting on the pulpit, untouched by the flames. Inside was a book, not a Bible, older, leather bound with no title. Inside were names, dozens of them, all the children born in Lick Fork since 1920. Next to each name, a symbol, either a cross or a jagged glyph that looked like 3 slashes intersecting. Some names were crossed out entirely. Others had long, detailed notes beside them. The writing changed midway through, became more frantic, more circular, like someone writing the same idea again and again with different words. Every page ended the same way. The mountain is full. He must walk again. The town collapsed after that. Survivors left. The mines dried up. The government bought most of the land and let it rot. The footprint? Still there. Locals say it won't erode, that moss won't grow near it, and birds won't perch in trees above it. And sometimes, during drought, a low, thunderous hum echoes out of the stone, as if something beneath the mountain is breathing. In 1988, a group of college students from Morehead State hiked into the area to study Appalachian folk trauma. Only one came back. His name was Aaron Drake. He'd carved a cross into his chest and wouldn't stop muttering a phrase over and over. The devil doesn't chase, he waits. Aaron was committed and later died in the asylum in Lexington. In 2019, a geologist from Virginia Tech named Lydia Grant was flown in to investigate rumors that the rock face had grown warmer. She brought thermal imaging gear and satellite data. Her report, never formally published, was leaked by a lab assistant. It claimed the mountain had a slowly shifting core anomaly, a heat signature moving steadily northeast, under the earth, directly beneath the footprint. The last line of her notes read, "It's not the footprint that matters. It's the direction it's walking." These days, locals warn against going near Lick Fork, not because of ghosts or curses or broken-down buildings, but because silence lives there, a heavy, watching silence, the kind that stretches out like shadows before dawn. They say if you stand too long near the footprint, you'll feel something pass beneath your feet. Not fast, not angry, just moving, like a man walking calmly through the dark, looking for something he once lost, and finally remembers where to find it. And if you hear a voice behind you saying your name, don't turn around. That means he's found it, and he's standing just behind your shoulder. Cades Hollow lies just outside the bounds of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, nestled in a stretch of woods so dense it swallows light before noon. On old maps, it's there, barely, a dot with no roads leading in, the name written in faded ink. What's left now are a few rotting cabins and a stone chimney that juts from the moss like a finger pointing skyward. But once, in the early 1900s, Cades Hollow was home to 5 families who kept to themselves and spoke in a clipped, peculiar dialect even other mountain folk found strange. They were tight-knit, deeply religious, and whispered of old traditions that went back long before the war, before even white settlers came to those parts. And they all knew about the whistlers. My grandfather, Amos Sheffield, was born in Cades Hollow in 1924 and was one of the last children to leave before the town was abandoned in 1937. He never liked to talk about it. He'd say, "Some places, son, God just don't look in on." And when I pushed for stories, asked why the place was left to rot, why no one ever went back, he'd go quiet. But when I was 16, on a night when the rain thudded heavy on the roof and the power blinked out, he told me the whole thing, or most of it. It started with the walls. The hollow was made of simple log cabins, many passed down through bloodlines. My great-grandfather built their family home with his own hands, using chestnut timbers pulled from the ridge above the creek. They said the timber was dark-gifted, a term the elders used with reverence and fear. It meant the trees had grown from ground where something had been buried, or worse, had crawled out, the kind of wood that groaned at night even without wind. Shortly after moving in, my grandfather, just a boy of 8, began hearing something in the walls at night. Not mice, not water, not the usual creaks of settling wood, but a low, drawn-out whistle, one long note, high-pitched and breathy, like a man trying to call a dog from the trees. It came every night, always from a different spot in the cabin, sometimes near the hearth, sometimes behind the bed, sometimes directly behind your head when you lay down. No one else claimed to hear it at first, not even his older brothers. But the sound grew more distinct. Eventually his mother heard it too and told the local preacher, Elijah Croom, a thin man with crooked hands and thick white eyes who held service in a root cellar by lantern light. Croom told her not to fear. He said, "Whistlers follow the blood. They speak through the walls to those with ears tuned to guilt." He said this like it was common knowledge. He gave her a charm made of twine, bone, and 3 flat pebbles strung together like a necklace, and told her to hang it in the crawlspace. That night the whistling stopped, but something else started. Each morning they'd find small handprints in the dust near the fireplace, too small to be any of the children's, and they'd hear scratching from under the floorboards, slow, methodical, almost like carving. One morning Amos lifted a loose plank to check. Carved beneath were 3 words, shallow and jagged. I remember you. He didn't tell anyone. He was afraid, not of the whistlers, but of what they might be remembering. Around that same time, strange things began happening throughout Cades Hollow. Livestock vanished from locked pens. Chickens, found with their necks wrung backwards. A child named Elsie Prophet was found standing barefoot in the middle of the woods, eyes open, mouth full of mud. When asked what happened, she said, "He told me to follow the music." No one ever figured out who he was. By the spring of 35, nearly every family had reported hearing the whistle at some point. Some claimed to see movement through cracks in their walls, not vermin, faces. Thin, long, smiling faces pressed into the slats as if the wood itself was stretching to hold them in. Families started boarding up rooms, sleeping together in the church at night. But that didn't help. One boy, Jeremy Tate, vanished from under his parents' arms while they slept. Gone without a sound. The door never opened. No windows broken. Just a cold draft and a faint whistling echo left behind. A decision was made to tear down the oldest house in the hollow, the home of the Getters family, whose patriarch, Silas Getter, had once claimed he could speak in the old tongue, and who'd been seen burying jars of dead birds near the creek. They said his home was the anchor of the sickness. A group of 6 men tore it apart with axes and torches. Beneath the floorboards they found a pit, shallow, filled with bones, some animal, some not. More disturbing was what lined the pit, hundreds of carved whistles made from bird bones, hollowed reeds, even human finger bones. The oldest man in town, Elias Prophet, collapsed on the spot. He began speaking in a rasping voice no one recognized. Not English, not Cherokee. Something older. His son said Elias hadn't spoken at all for 3 years before that moment. Before he died 2 days later, Elias scrawled a note in the dirt beside his bed using a spoon. The message read, "Whistlers wait until the blood is ripe." By winter, the town was emptying fast. Those who stayed began sealing their homes from the inside, nailing shut the windows, chaining the doors, burning their own walls. My grandfather's family was among the last to leave. He remembered his mother packing their things while sobbing, whispering, "They only sing when they know your name." She never explained what she meant. The last night in the hollow, Amos couldn't sleep. The whistling was louder than ever, coming from all sides of the house. Then it stopped. A voice, low and breathy, spoke from the wall behind his head. "You carry him. We remember, and will come calling." Amos never found out who him was. His mother died in childbirth a year later in Sevier County. His father was struck dumb for the rest of his life, never speaking another word. The rest of the hollow was reclaimed by forest. In 1974, a park ranger named Ed Myers went missing near the ruins of Cades Hollow. His radio was found still transmitting. On the tape, faint beneath the static, was a sound experts could never identify. A long, slow whistle, almost human, almost breath. The tape abruptly cuts off with what some claim is the sound of laughter. Childlike, wet, and wrong. In 1997, a group of urban explorers hiked into the ruins and filmed their adventure. Only fragments of the video survived, but in one sequence, as they pan across the inside of a collapsed cabin, dozens of long, hand-carved bone whistles are seen hanging from the ceiling like wind chimes. A gust of wind knocks them against each other. They don't make music. They all whistle the same single note, in unison, as if something else is breathing through them. The final shot shows one of the boys stopping suddenly and turning to the camera. "Did you hear that?" he asks. "What?" "My name. I swear to God. It whistled my name." He vanished 2 days later, never found. My grandfather died in 2003. Before he passed, he made me promise never to return to Cades Hollow. Never speak of it where children could hear, and above all, never whistle after dark. Because if you do, and something whistles back from inside your walls, that means they remember you, and they've started singing again. The Carter family had owned their land in Clay County, Tennessee for generations, settled deep in the valley where the dirt clung red and heavy, and the only road in ended with a rickety wooden bridge that washed out every spring. In that isolated spot, they built their lives, farming corn, raising goats, and marrying within a small network of neighboring homesteads. The town of Roslyn barely made the maps, but in 1911 it made the papers, because that was the year Eliza Carter vanished, and a week later her father, mother, and 3 brothers were found dead, their throats slit in what the local sheriff described as a godless act made worse by the pretense of ritual. The story didn't begin with Eliza's disappearance. It began years earlier, when her father, Eli Carter, began preaching in the woods behind their home. He wasn't ordained. He wasn't even educated past the 3rd grade. But sometime after his youngest son died of consumption, something in Eli broke. He claimed the Lord had spoken to him from the shadows of their root cellar, that he'd heard not a voice but a weeping, like the sorrow of all mankind had collected in one spot under the earth. He stopped attending the small Methodist chapel in town and started building his own house of mercy on the edge of their property, a barn repurposed into a chapel, furnished with little more than hay bales and a pulpit carved with crude symbols that weren't crosses. People began coming, not from town, but from the further hills, folk who looked half-starved and worn, women with children in tow who never spoke, men with thick beards and hollow stares. They came every Sunday and stayed late into the night. Neighbors said they heard wailing, chanting, and what sounded like a woman's voice echoing from the root cellar. When asked, Eli would only smile and say, "She speaks when we suffer rightly." Eliza was just 15 when it all started. She was quiet, obedient, but known for her eerie calmness. Teachers said she rarely blinked and never laughed. She stopped attending school around the time the chapel was finished. One teacher rode out to the Carter farm to ask why and came back shaken. He said Eliza met him barefoot at the gate, her dress covered in red clay. She told him, "We don't read books now. We only read the silence." Soon the Carters stopped coming into Roslyn altogether. Their mail piled up at the general store. Their livestock wandered loose. When a neighbor came to complain about pigs rooting in her garden, she said she found a sign nailed to the Carters' fence, burned around the edges. Blood is the doorway. Silence is the key. Then Eliza disappeared. At first, people assumed she'd run off. There were rumors of a boy from over the ridge, a Baptist's son she was seen talking to once at the spring. But within a week, concern turned to horror. A traveling tinker, Thomas Bell, stopped at the Carter place looking to trade tools. He found the barn door chapel wide open and the root cellar unlatched. What he found inside was never fully printed in the papers, but the details passed around in hushed whispers, especially among older mountain folk. Inside the cellar, Thomas found Eli Carter and his wife lying side by side on the ground, their throats opened clean as butchered deer. The three Carter sons were arranged around them in a circle, mouths sewn shut with coarse thread, each with a single coal clasped in their right hand. The walls of the cellar were covered in writing, biblical verses corrupted, inverted, rewritten. One line was repeated over and over. "She speaks when we bleed." Eliza was nowhere to be found. The sheriff called it a suicide pact, a mass delusion brought on by isolation and grief, but some details didn't fit. The bodies were too carefully arranged. The thread in the sons' mouths, black and waxed, wasn't the kind used locally. The coal, too, had a powdery residue not found in nearby mines, and most disturbing of all, the cellar had no blood trail from above, no footprints. As if the family had walked in, lain down, and the air itself had cut them open. Search parties combed the woods for weeks. Nothing. Then, one of the deputies' hounds refused to go near the Carter property. It howled whenever they approached the old chapel and clawed at the dirt, trying to get away. On a hunch, the sheriff ordered the root cellar dug out. They found a hollow beneath, dug like a grave, but lined with slate. Inside was a crude wooden box, an effigy, some said, wrapped in a woman's tattered dress. Inside the box was a piece of parchment with blood smeared across it. One word could be made out clearly. Eliza. That was the last any official record mentioned the case. The Carter farm was abandoned, overgrown, and eventually swallowed by forest. But stories persisted. In the 1950s, a family moved onto the property, unaware of its past. The father, a veteran, reported that his daughter began waking up in the middle of the night and standing in the corner, whispering to someone in the walls. She said the woman in the cellar wanted her to sing the silence. When the family tried to leave, their truck wouldn't start. The father went to fetch help and never came back. The girl was found days later, sitting at the edge of the old cellar, dirt under her nails, smiling blankly. She said, "Daddy heard her too. Now he's inside." Local legend called the figure the Silent Sister, a pale woman in a soiled white dress, her mouth sewn shut, who appears only to those who've lost something deeply. Faith, a child, a belief in the world's goodness. She doesn't speak, but her silence says everything. It calls people to her, makes them finish what she began. In 1982, a group of Appalachian folklore students from the University of Tennessee hiked out to the supposed site of the Carter farm. They took pictures of mossy foundations and the remnants of the root cellar, partially caved in, overgrown. One of them, Mara Delaney, kept a journal. Her final entry read, "We stayed too long. She's not silent. She sings in the dirt. I understand now. I can still hear my father's crying from the grave, and her voice filled the spaces between. The doorway is open." Mara was never seen again. Her journal was found left in a church pew 2 towns over. They say that if you stand near what's left of the cellar at dusk and press your ear to the ground, you'll hear weeping, not loud, but constant, like breath drawn slow through clenched teeth. If you speak, it stops, but if you stay quiet, if you listen long enough, you'll hear your own name whispered back and feel something brushing up from beneath the soil, like fingers seeking a hand to pull into the silence, and you'll understand why the Carters died with their mouths sewn shut, because some things, some women, are better left unheard. The Great Smoky Mountains have claimed their fair share of hikers. Some wander off trail, others fall to injury or exposure. But some, just a few, disappear so completely that their names are whispered not with grief, but fear. One such name is Vincent Greer, a former park ranger and amateur astronomer who vanished in 1997 while hiking a solo route through a lesser-known section of the Appalachian Trail near Clingman's Dome. His story, obscured by bureaucracy and official silence, survives only through the accounts of those who knew him and those who heard his last transmission. Vincent wasn't new to the mountains. He'd worked in the Smokies for nearly a decade, mostly in educational outreach. He ran programs for stargazing nights and wilderness navigation, and was known for his warmth, his meticulous nature, and his love of solitude. But after the sudden death of his wife in a car accident in 1996, something shifted in him. He left his ranger post, sold their house in Maryville, and began hiking full-time. Long stretches of the Appalachian Trail, off-grid, weeks at a time. He told friends he was looking for clarity, but according to one of them, a fellow ranger named Lyle Knox, Vincent was looking for something out there, something he wouldn't name. In the spring of '97, Vincent radioed the ranger station from a place near Jonas Creek, a seldom-traveled area thick with laurel, ravines, and moss-slick boulders. He logged his position as a courtesy and mentioned he'd be heading north along an unofficial trail known locally as Star Vale Path, a name passed among old-timers with an odd reverence. The trail doesn't appear on official maps. In fact, it was considered more of a local legend, a shortcut or a trap, depending on who you asked. The rumor was that the trail dipped into a hollow so deep the sky disappeared above you. The trees grew so tight and tall that they blotted out the stars. Vincent, an avid stargazer, should have been repelled by such a place. But the opposite seemed true. His final journal entry, mailed to Lyle in a package that arrived postmarked a day before he vanished, read, "I've found it. The place where they say the stars go missing. It's real, and I think it's older than the mountains themselves." 3 days later, the last known transmission from Vincent came in. His voice was calm, almost dreamy. "This is Ranger Greer. I'm in the hollow. I've lost visual contact with the sky. No compass reading, no GPS signal. Trees look wrong, bending inwards. Heard a sound like breathing coming from the ground itself. Not wind, not animal, it's steady, rhythmic, like lungs. I'll follow the sound, see where it leads." That was it. He was never heard from again. A full-scale search began within 48 hours, but efforts were hindered by fog, rain, and the sheer remoteness of the terrain. Teams reported bizarre compass failures, with readings spinning or freezing altogether. Dogs refused to enter the lowest part of the hollow, whining and pulling back on their leads. A few volunteers claimed to feel watched, even in the absence of wildlife. One reported hearing what sounded like someone whispering his name from beneath the moss. He quit the search the next day and wouldn't speak about what he'd heard again. No trace of Vincent was ever found. No backpack, no clothes, no campsite. Just his walking stick, wedged upright in a patch of earth too soft to hold it naturally, pointing directly into the hollow's deepest thicket. But the story didn't end there. In 2003, 6 years later, a group of hikers from Knoxville took a detour off the main trail and wound up near that same hollow. They didn't know its reputation. What they did know was that their watches stopped ticking around the same time they noticed something strange. There were no stars above them. It wasn't cloudy. The air was clear, cold, but the sky was empty. Not black, but blank, featureless. One of them, a woman named Tessa Moore, later described the sensation in a Reddit thread that was deleted within hours. A few users archived parts of it. In it, she wrote, "It was like standing beneath a ceiling, but not a sky. I felt like I was inside something vast and sleeping. We heard rustling below, not above, and I swear I saw footprints in the bark of the trees, like something had walked upside down. I never believed in anything weird until then. But that place is a throat waiting to swallow." In 2010, a man named Jude Hammond, a researcher from the University of North Carolina, specializing in Appalachian geomythology, set out to find the hollow based on archived ranger records and GPS triangulation from Vincent's last call. Jude, was skeptical. He assumed the stories were fabrications, folklore fed by trauma. But what he found, or rather didn't find, shook him. He brought with him high-precision GPS, satellite imaging equipment, and a thermal drone. As he approached the coordinates, all of them failed. The GPS scrambled. The thermal drone lost signal. And when he reached the hollow on foot, he noticed that his own shadow had vanished. Not just blurred, gone. Even though the sun still hung in the sky, the light didn't behave naturally. It diffused. It dispersed. He couldn't tell direction anymore, and worse, he couldn't recall how long he'd been walking. He turned around and barely made it back to his car. He later wrote in a private letter to a colleague, "The trees grew wrong. They arched inward, forming a canopy that felt deliberate, like ribs, like being inside something ancient and undying. I don't believe in God, but I believe in the hollow, and I believe Vincent found it, or it found him." After that, the area was quietly restricted. Officials claimed it was for ecological preservation. But Lyle Knox, now retired, said black SUVs and unmarked helicopters began showing up near Clingman's Dome that same year. They didn't wear uniforms, he said, and they weren't Park Service. They came with equipment I'd never seen before, and they didn't ask permission to go off trail. Today, the locals don't go near Starvale Path. Even those who don't believe in ghosts still avoid it. Campers report hearing static on their radios at night. Phones glitch with images of blank gray skies, even when stars are visible. One hiker said he woke up to find a map scratched into the inside of his tent, drawn in charcoal, a web of trails that didn't exist, with one central hollow marked only with the words, "He's still walking." That phrase appears in other places too, on scratched tree bark, on the backs of old trail signs, on a rock near the base of the dome where Vincent was last seen. Always the same. He's still walking. He followed the stars that vanished. And some say if you go there on a moonless night, into that part of the mountains where the trees bend inward and the air turns too still, if you stay long enough to let the silence stretch, to let the forest breathe, you'll hear it. Not an echo, not wind, a voice calling out coordinates that don't exist, and the longer you listen, the more you'll realize. It's your own voice coming back, but not in any direction you can escape, because there are places where the world thins, and some hollows were never meant to be walked through. They were meant to be entered once and never left. The town of Dry Creek, West Virginia, was never on most maps. Hidden deep in the folds of Raleigh County, it had no post office, no school, and only one road in or out, a ribbon of cracked pavement that disappeared into pine and shadow. By 1985, the population had dwindled to less than 70, most of them elderly, and the last thing holding the community together was the old Church of the Spirit's Flame. It sat on a knoll just east of town, whitewashed and rotting, its steeple leaning, its bell rusted silent, but inside, people claimed miracles once happened. Healing, tongues, visions, and at the heart of it all was Pastor Enoch Carver, a man who believed God spoke directly through fire. The revival began on the first Sunday of June, 1985. According to archived sermons recorded on dusty cassettes, Carver had fasted for 7 days before delivering what he called a holy utterance. The church was packed that morning, and he spoke of a divine visitation, a pillar of light he claimed to have seen rising from the woods at dawn. He called it a sign, a call to purify the land, to prepare for the burning. Witnesses later described that first revival night as electric. Tongues spoken. Healings claimed. A boy with a clubfoot reportedly walked. A woman half blind since birth swore she saw light dance from the ceiling like oil on water. But by the third night, something changed. The sermons grew darker, less about salvation, more about sacrifice. Carver began insisting that sin wasn't just inside people. It lived in the very bones of the land. He spoke of something beneath Dry Creek, a slumbering rot. He called it the hollow hunger, and he said the only way to keep it from rising was through fire and faith. He stopped using the Bible and began preaching from a red leather-bound book he claimed was received through revelation. No one recognized the symbols inside, arcane loops, jagged glyphs, some written vertically as if meant to be read while bowed. The congregation, caught in a fever of belief, followed him without question. It was around the 10th night when people from neighboring hollers noticed something was wrong. A mail carrier named Beatrice Lowe was the first outsider to raise alarm. She tried delivering a package to Dry Creek but was turned away by a man standing in the middle of the road, shirtless, arms scabbed with ash crosses, muttering scripture that didn't exist. He told her the town was under consecration and that the unclean would burn by sunrise. She drove straight to the county sheriff, but by the time anyone got there, the road was blocked by felled trees and barbed wire strung up between rusted poles. Dry Creek had sealed itself in. No one left. No one answered calls. No one fetched supplies. They lived entirely off what little they had, and for 24 nights the fires never stopped. Locals from neighboring hollows reported seeing orange glow above the tree line at night, strange shapes moving in procession, and a low, constant hum like a chant that never ended. On the 25th night, everything went dark. When the state police finally entered the town, what they found didn't make the news. The church had burned to the foundation, not collapsed, burned down into the earth, as if it had been devoured from beneath. But there were no bodies, no bones, no blood, just 70 burnt-in footprints that ended in the center of the sanctuary's blackened remains. The official report, quietly filed and sealed, claimed spontaneous mass disappearance under ritual conditions. One trooper who assisted in the investigation later spoke anonymously to a Charleston Gazette reporter. He said that down in the church's basement, where the pulpit used to stand, they found a tunnel, narrow, hand-carved, spiraling downward. They sent a drone down with a light. It cut out after 50 feet. But before it did, the footage showed something scrawled along the walls, that same looping script Carver had preached from, burned into the dirt itself, and one phrase repeated, over and over in English, "The body is the flame is the door." None of the residents were ever seen again. No survivors. No family came forward. It was as if Dry Creek had erased itself from the world. But the story doesn't end there. In 2001, a group of urban explorers, fascinated by Appalachian ghost towns, found their way to what remained of Dry Creek. By then, nature had reclaimed most of it. Ivy and rot had swallowed the homes, but the church's ruins remained untouched, perfectly preserved, as if frozen in the moment it burned. One of the explorers, David Ellis, later posted on an old message board about what they saw. They found the tunnel, the same spiral path, but something was wrong with the sound. He described it as too still. Not silent. Still. He said the deeper they went, the more the air began to feel thick, oily, like breathing through cotton soaked in kerosene. They heard a whisper, not outside, but inside their ears. Not a voice, voices, plural, chanting in unison. His last post read, "I don't think they're gone. I think they went deeper, and I think Carver found something older than fire itself." That thread was wiped from the server 3 days later. None of the others in the group posted again. In 2015, a geologist surveying abandoned coal fields in the region reported a strange anomaly in the Dry Creek area. Ground-penetrating radar picked up a vast hollow chamber beneath the earth, far, larger than any mine, with regular geometric shapes not consistent with natural formation. When he returned a month later with a university team, the equipment failed to function, and that night, their camp caught fire. No cause was ever determined. No arson, no lightning, just flame rising from the ground. One of the professors wrote, "It felt like being watched, not from above or behind, from below, as if something ancient had turned its gaze upward for the first time in 1,000 years." Today, no one lives in Dry Creek. Even the name has faded from maps. Locals say animals avoid the area, that birds won't fly over it. Some swear they see figures moving in the trees at dusk, barefoot, ash-covered, eyes glowing faint red. And on the last Sunday of June each year, anniversary of the final revival, those who live nearby say they still hear the chanting. Faint, low, rising from the earth like heat. One last thing. In 2020, a hiker posted a photo on a wilderness forum. He was off-trail near Raleigh County, bushwhacking through old logging roads. He found a weathered stone cross and a rusted sign bolted to a tree, nearly consumed by bark. It read, "You are now entering consecrated ground. The flame watches. The body remains." That hiker's account has been inactive ever since. And if you listen to the archived tapes of Pastor Carver's final sermon, those warped cassettes passed hand to hand, you'll hear him say, in a voice that grows more guttural as it goes, "The fire we fear is not punishment. It is the key. When we burn, we become. And through the flame, we awaken what waits beneath." What's terrifying isn't that 70 people vanished. It's that they believed. And somewhere down in the hollow earth of West Virginia, they're still praying, still burning, still waiting for the world above to catch fire. My grandfather used to say the devil's backbone was cursed long before any white man ever laid a boot on it. The ridge cuts through eastern Tennessee like a jagged scar, steep and mean, with rock outcroppings so sharp they'll slice leather. It's a place hunters avoid, hikers whisper about, and locals pretend doesn't exist. And yet, for reasons I can't explain, that land has belonged to my family for 4 generations, passed from father to son like a secret, like a burden. The story of what happened up there, the one that really matters, started in 1994. I was 15 when my father moved us back to the old homestead after my mother died. It was his inheritance, he said. 160 acres of thick forest, rusted fences, and one crooked 2-story house that looked like it was holding its breath to keep from collapsing. He told me we'd fix it up, build a new life, but even then I knew something wasn't right. The air tasted like rust, and every night, long after the sun dipped behind the ridge, I heard something scream. Not a coyote, not a fox. Something deeper, like a man being torn open inch by inch. I didn't tell anyone. Not at first. The house had been empty since the 70s, ever since my great-uncle Josiah put a shotgun in his mouth after spending 3 days naked, in the woods. The coroner said exposure made him delusional, but my grandmother always said he saw something. Something tied to the tree. They never called it by name, just the tree. It grew dead center on the highest part of the ridge, gnarled, black-barked, split open at the trunk like it had been struck by lightning, and decided to keep growing anyway. Nothing lived near it, no moss, no birdsong, even snow avoided its roots. The first time I saw it, I was alone. My dad sent me to check the fence line, and I wandered too far. I didn't even know I was near the summit until the brush thinned, and I saw it, twisted like a fist against the sky. My stomach turned the moment I looked at it, like something inside me knew to be afraid. But I couldn't look away. Then it screamed. It started low, like the groan of splitting wood, but climbed, until it sounded human, pained, trapped. I ran and didn't stop until I hit the house. I didn't sleep for 2 nights. That was the beginning. Over the next 6 months, my father changed. He became distant, obsessive, spent hours walking the ridge, scribbling in a leather-bound journal he wouldn't let me touch. I'd hear him whispering under his breath, names I didn't recognize. Sometimes I'd catch him staring out the window at the hills for hours, eyes glassy, lips moving without sound. One night, I woke to find him digging in the front yard, shirtless, bleeding, his hands raw. He told me the roots were spreading, that he could hear the rot whispering. I begged him to stop, but he slapped me hard enough to knock me down. That was the first time he looked at me, and didn't seem to know who I was. He stopped eating, stopped sleeping, and one night he didn't come home. The sheriff found him 3 days later, up near the tree, kneeling in front of it, eyes open, lips curled in a smile. His body was stiff, his skin gray, cause of death unknown. The doctor said it looked like cardiac arrest, but his heart had no signs of damage, no trauma. It was like he just stopped. I moved in with my aunt after that. I never went back. Couldn't. But that's not the end. In 2010, I inherited the property. I considered selling it, but something, curiosity, maybe guilt, made me go back, just once, to see it, to understand what had pulled my father apart. I hiked up the ridge alone. The forest was still, unnaturally quiet, but the moment I crested the summit, I knew I'd made a mistake. The tree was still there, bigger than I remembered, its trunk wider, split deeper. At the base, I found bones. Animal, maybe human, hard to tell, and something else, 7 small, wooden idols arranged in a semicircle, each carved with a screaming face, mouths open, eyes gouged out. That night, I started dreaming. I saw my father, naked and shivering, kneeling at the tree, whispering the names I'd heard him mutter all those years ago. I saw Josiah, too, his face pale and bloated, staring out from within the split trunk as if the wood had grown around him. I saw fire, roots writhing like snakes, and always the screaming. I researched everything I could, found records dating back to the 1800s, mentions of a hanging tree, where suspected witches were executed by traveling judges from the lowlands. 4 women, 1 man, burned alive when the rope snapped and someone claimed to see red light pouring from their mouths. The townsfolk panicked and torched the hill. That's how the ridge got its name. The Devil's Backbone. The tree that grew afterward sprouted from the center of that burn. My grandfather's journal confirmed it. He wrote of dreams, of whispers, of being called. Every man in our family since 1901 had been drawn to that place. Every one of them lost to madness, suicide, or disappearance. I stopped sleeping. I saw shadows in the corners of my room, even in daylight. Heard screams through the floorboards. On the last night before I left for good, I woke to the sound of someone crying outside. A woman's voice, soft and distant. I looked out the window and saw her, a pale figure in a dress from another century, walking toward the ridge. I followed her. The forest swallowed all sound. Her footprints left no mark, but I felt myself being pulled, not just in body, in blood. When I reached the summit, she stood at the base of the tree, her back to me. Then she turned, and I saw her face. Empty, hollow, skin stretched tight over bone. She opened her mouth and screamed, and the sound was my father's voice. I ran. I didn't stop until I reached the road. I left the next morning and never returned. I put the land in trust. Inaccessible. I warned the county not to develop it. They ignored me. In 2022, a survey crew went missing while mapping the area. 3. A man, 1 woman. They radioed in at 3:12 p.m., reporting strange carvings near a tree on the summit. After that, nothing. No distress call, no signs of struggle, just silence. When the search team arrived, all they found were 4 sets of boot prints leading to the tree, and none leading away. People don't believe me when I tell them this. They laugh, or nod politely and assume it's a family ghost story. But I know what's real. I know what grows up there. It's not a tree anymore. It hasn't been for a long time. It's something older, something hungry. And the screams aren't echoes of the past. They're warnings. The land remembers what was buried. And if you stand too close, if you listen too long, it remembers you, too. And in the silence of the Devil's Backbone, where nothing lives, where even the wind refuses to speak, you'll hear the tree begin to scream, and it will scream with your name. They say there's a church in the woods outside of Manchester, Kentucky, that no one talks about. Not because they forgot, far from it, but because remembering invites it back. The locals just call it the Quiet Church. No one remembers its real name, or if it even had one. The records are gone. The road to it doesn't appear on maps anymore. But ask anyone over 60 who grew up in the hollers off Turkey Foot Road, and their eyes shift, their voices lower, and they'll tell you the same thing. Don't go looking for it. I didn't listen. My name is Daniel Price. I was raised in Lexington, but my family roots run deep in Clay County. My grandmother Eula was born there in 1932 and never left until the day she died in 2017. At her funeral, I found an old black and white photo tucked into her Bible. It showed a group of people standing in front of a weathered wooden chapel, half hidden by dense pine. No sign, no crosses, just faces, 19 of them, and not one looked at the camera, not even the children. I asked my uncle about it, and he froze, his jaw twitching like he'd bitten into something sour. "That's the church," he muttered. "Don't go near it, not ever." Naturally, I did the opposite. In 2019, I was 33 and working on a podcast series about obscure Appalachian folklore. I thought the story of the Quiet Church would be a perfect centerpiece, creepy but local, the kind of tale people would whisper about late at night. I drove down in March, right as the last of winter let go. I stayed with my cousin James, who still lived in the house his daddy built with his own hands. He was reluctant to talk about the church at first, but a bottle of bourbon loosened his tongue. He told me the story he'd heard from his own grandfather. In the 1940s, a small, isolationist Pentecostal sect settled in the hills east of Manchester. They called themselves the Children of the Ark. They believed the world was already lost to sin, and that only total separation from society could preserve their purity. They built the church by hand. No electricity, no running water. They didn't allow outsiders. No one knew where they came from. Some said Ohio. Others whispered about Pennsylvania or even Canada. But the land they chose had a long, violent history. Cherokee burial grounds, old Civil War skirmishes, moonshiner graves, the kind of land that remembers. James told me that over a span of 20 years, more than 24 people went missing within 5 miles of that church. Hikers, hunters, trappers, even a forest ranger. Each time, the trail went cold near the same spot, an old deer path that veered off into the thicker woods east of Jack's Fork. The official explanation was always the same: misadventure, but folks knew better. I pressed James for more, but he cut me off. That church don't want to be found, and if it lets you find it, it's because you're supposed to. Still, I was determined. I hiked in on March 18th, using an old topo map and my phone's GPS. The forest was dense, quiet. I passed rusted fencing, crumbled stone markers, and trees marked with symbols I didn't recognize. Circles with thorns, slashes over handprints, tiny wooden crosses with no arms. Birds avoided the place. Even the wind seemed cautious. After 3 hours, I found it. It was smaller than I expected. Just a single building, leaning slightly, roof bowed like an old man in prayer. The wood was gray with age, the windows boarded from the inside. A crude bell tower jutted from the roof. The rope snapped, the bell long gone. I approached slowly, recording everything. The air was heavy, like walking through molasses. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. The door creaked open with one push. Inside it smelled of old wood, ash and damp rot. The pews were intact, but warped. The altar bore no cross, only a flat stone slab with dark stains that looked too deliberate, to be random. And behind the pulpit, painted in faded red, was a symbol, a tree with roots that curled inward like claws. It was the same as the marks on the trees outside. I set up my equipment and started recording narration, describing everything I saw. That's when I heard it, whispering. At first I thought it was wind, but it was too rhythmic, too structured. Dozens of voices, all layered, speaking in a language I didn't recognize. I spun around, but the room was empty. The pews sat still, the dust didn't move, and yet the whispers continued, growing louder. I backed toward the door. That's when I noticed the floorboards under the altar had shifted slightly. Curious and stupid, I pulled at them until one cracked loose. Beneath it was a crawl space. I dropped my flashlight into the hole, and what it illuminated has haunted every dream I've had since. Bones, hundreds of them, stacked in careful piles, some animal, some clearly human. Small ones, children's, jawbones with missing teeth, skulls with holes in the crown, clean and precise. And in the center, laid out on a blackened cloth, was a book. I reached for it, but the moment my fingers touched the leather, the whispering stopped. Everything went dead, silent. Then the bell rang. I swear to you I didn't imagine it. The rope was gone, and yet the sound was clear, one deep, metallic toll, and with it came the footsteps, slow, measured, on the roof at first, then the rafters, then down the walls. I shoved the board back in place and ran. Outside, the forest had changed. The sky was darker. The trees leaned inward like they were listening. I ran until my lungs gave out, stumbled onto the old trail, and didn't stop until I saw the road. I left everything: camera, gear, audio files. I didn't care. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I wasn't tired, but because I couldn't stop hearing the voices. They whispered from the corners of my room, from inside the walls. My cousin James drove me to a motel, too spooked, to let me stay in his house. Before he left, he looked at me and said, "You brought it back. You shouldn't have gone." 3 weeks later, James went missing. Disappeared from his own front porch. His truck was still in the driveway, his boots by the door. The only thing left behind was his cell phone, recording static. The sheriff's department searched for 5 days. No trace. I told them what I'd seen. They didn't believe me, laughed even. But I saw the way one of the deputies gripped his crucifix when I mentioned the church. He knew. I left Kentucky and never returned. I buried the story, deleted my podcast episodes, abandoned my social media. But the voices never left. They speak only when I'm alone, just beneath the noise of the world. A constant reminder, a tether. And last week, I received a package with no return address. Inside was my old recorder, the one I left in the church. It was turned off, batteries dead, but the audio was still intact. I pressed play and heard myself whispering, over and over, in a voice that wasn't quite mine. We are the quiet. We are the root. We are the blood that speaks through wood. I don't know what they want. I don't know why I was allowed to leave, but I know this. Somewhere in the woods of Clay County there is a church that doesn't forget, and it is waiting for someone else to listen. And when it does, the forest will fall silent again, because nothing screams louder than a place that has forgotten how to pray. There's a part of the Appalachian Trail most locals won't hike anymore, just west of Iron Mountain Gap, where North Carolina bleeds into Tennessee. Old-timers call it Still Hollow. It doesn't appear on any official trail maps now, but you can find it in pre-1980s USGS maps if you know what to look for. According to legend, the hollow isn't haunted in the traditional sense. It's forgotten by time. A seam torn open in the folds of the world where things go in but don't always come back. Or worse, they return, different. I first heard about Still Hollow from a retired search and rescue officer named Cliff Yarber, who worked out of Irwin, Tennessee, for nearly 25 years. I'd reached out while researching Appalachian Trail disappearances for a project that never saw the light of day. Partly because what I found shook me, and partly because I didn't think anyone would believe me. Cliff agreed to meet me in person at a diner off Highway 19. He was a mountain of a man, weathered and quiet, with that haunted look common among men who've seen too much but lived to carry it. He brought a single file folder with him, yellowed from years of storage. Inside were 3 reports, all involving missing persons between 1978 and 1994. All vanished within a 2-mile radius of Still Hollow, all in late autumn, all during calm, clear weather, and none were ever found. "I'll tell you about one," he said, sipping black coffee. "The others, they don't sit right in my bones." The case was from October 1987. A hiker named Chelsea Boone, 27 years old, had come down from Roan Mountain to do a solo section hike southbound. She was an experienced backpacker from Asheville, last seen 3 days into her hike by a pair of birders who said she looked healthy and cheerful. She was expected to make it to Iron Mountain Shelter but never signed the register. 3 days later, her pack was found sitting upright beside a trail fork near Still Hollow. Inside were her maps, food, and a journal. No sign of struggle. Her tent was packed, her boots were laced, but Chelsea was gone. The journal had only one strange entry dated the day before her disappearance. "Something's wrong with this place. The air feels still, too still, like the forest is holding its breath. I thought I saw someone following me yesterday, but when I turned around, there was nothing. Just trees. Always the trees. I tried to mark my path, but the markers disappear when I look away, like the woods rearrange themselves when I'm not watching. If I make it out, I'm burning this section from my maps." Cliff paused. "That's not what made me remember it all these years, though," he said. "It was what happened 9 days later. A thru-hiker named John Elliott stumbled into the ranger station, barefoot, dehydrated, barely coherent. He claimed to have gotten lost near Iron Mountain during a fog that came out of nowhere. When pressed, he said he found a girl in the woods, wearing old-fashioned gear, muttering to herself about how time had stopped. Said she asked what year it was. When he told her, she ran screaming into the woods, repeating, 'It's too late! It's too late!' Searchers combed the area for days. No trace of her, no proof. Just Elliott's story and a small embroidered patch found in the mud near where he claimed they met. The patch matched a photo Cliff had from Chelsea Boone's family. Her backpack strap had been sewn with it, a blue and red Appalachian Trail logo, hand-stitched. Cliff never filed the detail officially. "No one would have believed it," he muttered. "Hell, I barely believe it." I became obsessed after that. I tried to find others who'd reported anything strange in the same area. It took time, but I found 3. The first was a man named Toby Flanders, a geology student who'd gone hiking in the early 90s and claimed to have spent 3 days in the hollow, only to emerge 11 hours after he entered. He swore he saw a man with no shadow and heard clocks ticking from beneath the soil. The second was a woman named Ruth Ann Morton, who said her father vanished there in 1961 while hunting ginseng. She was 5 when it happened. 40 years later, she got a call from a payphone in Bristol. The man on the other end said only one thing before hanging up. "The trees don't sleep anymore." The number was never traced. The last account was mine. In the fall of 2021, I finally went to Still Hollow. It was late October. Dry leaves crunched underfoot, and the light had that strange golden thickness that only comes just before dusk in the mountains. I took the same fork where Chelsea's pack had been found. The air grew dense. The wind stopped. Not a bird, not a squirrel, nothing moved. Then I heard the ticking, faint at first, like a pocket watch buried deep in the earth. I pressed on. The forest began to curve subtly, unnaturally. Trees leaning in, ways they shouldn't. Shadows fell, in places with no source. I looked down and saw boot prints in the loam, fresh, leading off the path. I followed them, heart hammering. They ended at the base of a massive oak tree split by lightning. In the hollow of the trunk was something pale, fabric. I reached in and pulled out a torn piece of map, marked with red ink. My own handwriting, the same notes I'd made that morning. But I hadn't dropped it. I hadn't even taken it out. Turned to leave and saw her. A woman standing at the edge of the trees, barefoot in old trail clothes, hair tangled with leaves. She looked straight through me, lips moving without sound. Then she vanished. Not walked away, vanished. Like air swallowing smoke. I ran. I don't remember how I got back to the car. I blacked out for part of it. When I checked my phone, it was still the same day. But my beard had grown. My nails were longer. My voicemail had 6 missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize, and 1 voicemail that played only static, and a single voice whispering, "Still, I haven't been back. I haven't talked about it until now." But this year in July, I received a letter postmarked from Unicoi. No return address. Inside was a photograph. Black and white, faded. It showed the same woman I saw in the woods, smiling, holding a hiking pole. The back read, Chelsea, 1987. I don't know if she's still out there, or if she ever left. Maybe Still Hollow isn't a place you find. Maybe it finds you when the time is right. When you're alone. When you're just curious enough to step off the path. Just remember, if the woods go quiet and the air grows still, and the wind doesn't blow, turn around. Because in Still Hollow, time doesn't pass. It waits. In the far reaches of Logan County, West Virginia, where the roads run like veins through coal-black hills and rusted trailer skeletons pepper forgotten hollows, there's a story passed between those who've lived long enough to know what to avoid, not whispered around campfires or shared on message boards. No, this one lingers only in family warnings, and the oldest sheriff logs now gathering dust in courthouse basements. It's about a place most pretend doesn't exist anymore. A church, deep in the woods, long since left off maps. A church that was buried, burned, and exorcised, but never truly gone. Locals called it the Final Light Tabernacle, a revivalist church that sprang up in the 1930s during the Pentecostal boom that swept Appalachia like wildfire. It started as a tent revival on land that once belonged to a Union deserter hanged for witchcraft, a land the Cherokee called Datsuhi, meaning no dawn. In 1933, a preacher named Elijah Rowan brought his followers there. The congregation wasn't from Logan County. Some said they came from Alabama, others from deeper parts of Tennessee. They were private, tight-knit, and deeply committed to the idea that the world was ending. Not metaphorically, but literally, soon. And only those baptized in the black blood of the Lamb would be spared. The church was built with scavenged lumber and painted entirely in pitch-black tar. There were no windows. Services were held after midnight. People said they heard screaming and laughter in equal measure drifting from the hollow on those moonless nights. The sheriff made half-hearted attempts to investigate, but whenever deputies approached, they were met with silence. One man, Deputy Earl Penley, went missing in 1935. His last known location was the dirt path leading to the tabernacle. All they ever found was his badge, nailed to the trunk of a tree, upside down. For a while, people left them alone. Until 1942. That winter, 3 children vanished from a family homestead less than a mile from the church grounds. 2 boys and their sister, ages 6, 8, and 10. Their parents swore they'd gone to sleep in their shared bed. The snow that night was heavy. No tracks, no broken windows, only their blankets folded neatly at the foot of the bed come morning, and, on the wall above their mattress, smeared in black ash, a perfect circle with 3 inverted crosses inside it, the same symbol etched above the altar in the tabernacle, according to a schoolteacher who'd once snuck in during the day. That teacher, Ruth Hager, was the only outsider to ever step inside and live to speak about it. Her journal, now in the hands of her great-granddaughter, tells a story of robed figures who spoke in guttural, unintelligible tongues and a preacher who didn't blink, ever. She claimed the congregation didn't worship God in the traditional sense, but the one who sees in the dark. She said the altar wasn't stone or wood, but bone, human, stacked vertebrae polished smooth. In March of 1943, the town finally acted. A group of 12 men, fathers, brothers, and coal miners, marched into the hollow with kerosene and hunting rifles. They waited until after a Sunday service. As the congregation gathered in song, the men barred the door and set fire to the building, or so they tried. The flames wouldn't catch. Witnesses said the fire hissed, roared, and then died, like it had been smothered from the inside. The church remained untouched. Not a scorch mark on the blackened wood. That same night, 2 of the 12 were found dead near the river. Both had drowned, despite there being no signs of water in their lungs. Their faces were frozen in wide-mouthed screams. 3 weeks later, the entire congregation disappeared. No warning. No belongings left behind. No bodies ever found. The church sat silent, doors wide open. Bibles left mid-sermon. Candles melted to the floor. In time, trees and vines reclaimed the trail. Snow would flatten the old campgrounds. Nature tried to forget. But some things don't stay buried. In 1971, 2 teenagers from Chapmanville went missing while camping near the old logging road. One of them, Harlan Webb, was found a week later in a drainage culvert, covered in scratches, and nearly catatonic. He never spoke again. His brother Pete was never found. Harlan's backpack contained a single item that didn't belong to him. A hymnal bound in black leather, brittle with age. The first page was marked in what experts said was dried blood. The title, Psalms of the Hollow Eye. From the late 70s to the early 90s, hikers, hunters, and curious thrill-seekers occasionally stumbled into the hollow. Most never found anything. A few reported strange happenings: compasses spinning, cold spots in the middle of summer, muffled whispers when no one was around. But then came the story of Alma Dykes. In 1994, Alma, a 42-year-old nurse, moved into her grandfather's old homestead near Blair Mountain. She was trying to escape a violent relationship and live quietly off-grid. One morning, while collecting firewood, she found something buried under the leaves in the forest, an old tar-black door. It led nowhere, just a wooden frame upright in the earth. Curious, she returned later that day and found the outline of a foundation. Over the next week, Alma uncovered what she believed was the forgotten tabernacle. She didn't tell anyone. She didn't report it. Instead, she started recording herself, journaling in cassette tapes. 22 tapes in total. On the first, she sounds calm, skeptical, amused even. By tape 8, her voice trembles. She claims the forest is changing, that shadows are moving independently, that she sees people standing at the tree line, watching her. By tape 15, she's reciting verses, strange ones, words not in English. Her voice deeper. The final tape is 3 hours of silence, except if you listen closely at the very end, you can hear breathing. Wet, rasping, not human. Alma Dykes vanished in November 1994. Her cabin was found empty, her truck still parked. On the kitchen table, a single black candle had burned all the way down, melted into the wood. Her dog, a blue heeler named Jessup, was found wandering 3 days later, blind and trembling. Law enforcement never investigated seriously. Locals already knew. They said the church had called her, that it always took one every few decades to wake the wood. I visited the hollow once, just once, 2018, late October. I was with a local historian named Lester Vaughn, who'd grown up hearing whispers of the church that wouldn't burn. He'd never gone down there himself, but agreed to accompany me out of curiosity, and I suspect guilt. His grandfather had been one of the 12 who tried to burn it in 1943. The trail was nearly invisible, but about 2 miles in, the trees began to thin, and we reached a clearing that felt wrong. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was oppressive. Like sound, itself was being absorbed. And there it was. The church still standing. Black wood, no rot, no overgrowth. Just standing there, like it had waited for us. Lester stopped breathing. I turned to speak to him, but he just pointed. His face white, eyes wide. There were candles, lit inside. We didn't go in. We ran, all the way back to the truck. I tried to return the next day, but the trail was gone. not overgrown, gone. Like the forest had sewn it shut behind us. 3 months later, Lester hung himself in his shed. The note he left was one line. They never blinked. To this day, no one can explain why that church won't decay, won't burn, won't disappear. But I've heard rumors lately, people who say they saw robed figures in the woods near Dingues. A new revival. A movement. One man posted online that he attended a midnight watch in an undisclosed hollow. He said it was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. That the preacher had no eyes, that the church glowed from within. He deleted the post a day later. His profile went dark. No one's heard from him since. So if you're ever deep in the Appalachian woods and the forest goes too quiet, if the trees lean in and the air thickens like syrup, if you see a black spire rising between the trees with no windows and no sound coming from within, turn back, because the tabernacle never stopped calling. And it never needed fire to take what it wants. If this story gripped you and sent chills down your spine, there's more where that came from. Appalachia hides secrets darker than you can imagine, and we're just getting started. Subscribe to Verified Fears for more true, terrifying tales rooted in real-life horror and forgotten folklore. Turn on notifications so you never miss the next. Descent into the unknown. Your next nightmare is only one story away.